Many countries and cities around the world are known for their tourist attractions that delight visitors from all over, with breathtaking landscapes, iconic landmarks, and a multitude of unique experiences. These destinations attract millions of tourists each year. It's easy to think of places like New York, London, and Paris, or the paradisiacal beaches scattered across the coasts of various continents. But what about the least visited place on the planet? Have you ever thought about it? Today, we are exploring Nauru, a tiny piece of land lost in the middle of the Pacific, a place so forgotten that it barely receives visitors. But don't let its size fool you. What happens there is worthy of a horror movie. Are you curious to know how a tropical paradise became one of the most feared and avoided places in the world? Then stick around, because what you'll discover about Nauru will leave you speechless. Nauru is literally lost in the middle of the Pacific. When we say isolated, it's no exaggeration. The nearest island, Banaba in Kiribati, is over 300 kilometers away, and reaching the nearest continent is a complicated mission. Brisbane in Australia is nearly 3,000 kilometers away, a flight of about 5 hours. Honolulu in Hawaii is more than 4,000 kilometers away, making Nauru one of the most remote places on the planet. Surrounded by coral reefs and with rugged terrain inland, this small island exudes an air of mystery and exclusivity. The difficult access and lack of infrastructure for visitors make it an almost inaccessible destination, with a single international airport that operates on a restricted basis and no natural ports. Getting to Nauru is a real adventure. Additionally, its unique location in the middle of the Pacific gives it an uncommon biodiversity and a virtually untouched environment, both culturally and ecologically. Nauru is a place few dare to explore, but holds secrets and stories that impress even the most experienced travelers. But if reaching this country is a challenge due to its remoteness, the perception changes completely when you finally set foot on the island. Nauru is the third smallest country in the world, smaller than many districts of large cities. To give you an idea, everything is within reach. The beaches, the administrative center, the houses, everything is right there. In terms of territory, Nauru is only surpassed by the Vatican and Monaco. But here's the big difference. While the Vatican is the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church, and Monaco is synonymous with luxury and glamour on the French Riviera, Nauru is an almost forgotten corner of the Pacific, away from the spotlight and virtually unknown to the rest of the world. If everything seems within arm's reach, this is also reflected in the roads. The island has only 30 kilometers of roads that circle the entire country. You can explore Nauru by car in just over an hour, without rushing, and with plenty of stops to admire the blue sea and the surrounding landscapes. With only one gas station and very few cars, traffic jams are non-existent there. In addition to the roads, Nauru has a small railway line of almost 4 kilometers, built in 1907. This track, which was once used to transport phosphate, symbolizes both the prosperity and the decline of the island, since the same phosphate that brought wealth ended up being the reason for its ruin. Besides being small and easy to navigate, Nauru is also unique in another aspect. It has no official capital. Unlike most countries, this small island follows a very different path. While many countries have one capital and some even 2 or 3, like Bolivia and South Africa, in Nauru things are a bit simpler, or, depending on how you look at it, more complicated. The island has no city that is officially the center of everything. Instead of a city that centralizes everything, the role of the capital is assigned to Yaren, a district on the south coast. There you will find the parliament, embassies of countries like Taiwan and Australia, and the only international airport. But Yaren is not exactly a city. It's more of an administrative area where everything happens without the typical structure of a capital. And if the absence of a capital is already quite peculiar, here's another one. Nauru is also one of the least visited countries in the world. Even with its paradisiacal landscapes and all the island's charm, only about 200 people venture there each year. But why so few visitors? It's not for lack of natural beauty, I assure you. Rather, it's due to the difficulties in getting there. To start, only one airline operates flights to the island with limited schedules and unattractive prices. And as if that weren't enough, getting a visa to set foot on Nauruan soil can be a real ordeal. To give you an idea of how exclusive it is to visit this country, fewer than 15,000 people have ever been to Nauru. It's like being part of a select club of explorers who have uncovered one of the best-kept secrets of the Pacific. Besides being a remote destination, Nauru faces a series of challenges that deter even the bravest. And as we'll see later, there's an even darker reason behind this isolation. Another curiosity is that the island has no military. That's right, no soldiers, tanks, or military bases. The island lacks its own armed forces, and in case of external threats, it is Australia that assumes responsibility. This agreement has existed for decades and makes sense for such a small and isolated place. Instead of spending its scarce resources on a military structure, Nauru has opted to focus on other areas, leaving security in the hands of the Australians. Meanwhile, a small local police force handles maintaining order and solving internal problems. Simple, effective, and for a country with a population that could fit in a neighborhood of any large city, this strategy is very practical. It's worth remembering that Nauru is not alone in this. Other small countries and islands in the Pacific adopt a similar approach, relying on larger nations to ensure their security. Simple and effective, right? Continuing our tour of the island, let's now talk about something more serious: health. Besides being one of the least visited countries in the world, Nauru also holds an unenviable title. It has one of the highest obesity rates on the planet. Around 80% of the population is overweight, and the problem goes far beyond genetics or lifestyle. Here, obesity has cultural roots. In the past, being fat was considered a sign of prosperity. The more you ate, the more successful and healthy the community considered you. Leaders and chiefs flaunted this distorted vision, which had severe consequences for the health of the Nauruans. With the intense exploitation of phosphate and the loss of fertile lands, the diet came to depend almost exclusively on processed products full of fat and sugar. Without access to healthy options and with an increasingly sedentary lifestyle, the result could not be otherwise. About 40% of the population suffers from diabetes, and for many, this means facing amputations and serious complications that make daily life even more difficult. But obesity is not the only problem. Cigarette addiction also severely affects the health of the Nauruans. The country has one of the highest tobacco consumption rates in the world, which only worsens an already complicated health situation. A significant challenge for such a small nation where public health problems have become enormous. And since we are talking about phosphate mining, let's delve into the dark side of Nauru. Believe it or not, Nauru, this tiny dot in the middle of the Pacific, was once known as the richest island in the world. Yes, a place that today lives in oblivion was once swimming in money. But how was this possible? It all started in the 1970s when Nauru achieved absurd wealth thanks to phosphate, a natural resource formed over centuries by seabird droppings. This white gold was so valuable that it transformed the small island into a genuine empire of wealth. While the rest of the world dreamed of prosperity, Nauru lived an economic fairy tale. To give you an idea, in 1975, the per capita income of Nauruans reached the astronomical figure of $176,000, more than triple the per capita income of the United States at the same time. With so much money flowing, Nauruans indulged in luxury and ostentation. Cadillacs, Jeeps, and Land Rovers roamed the island's scarce roads as if parading in Beverly Hills. And it didn't end there. The government paid for everything: healthcare, education, housing, and no one paid taxes. The island became a feast of abundance, and residents invested abroad, bought properties, and traveled the world as if tomorrow would never come. But like any fairy tale, the magic didn't last long. Uncontrolled exploitation exhausted the phosphate resources, and suddenly, what was a sea of money turned into a desert of debts. What remains of this golden era? Abandoned cars, decaying buildings, and a population that has seen its paradise turn into a nightmare. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. And in Nauru, this couldn't be truer. The phosphate that brought wealth to the small island was also responsible for its destruction. Unrestrained exploitation left the interior of Nauru practically barren. A land that once was green and fertile now looks like a moonscape. More than 80% of the island was devastated by mining, transforming the landscape into something unrecognizable. The fertile lands that provided food and sustenance to the population are now a field of abandoned machinery and lifeless terrain. This environmental degradation had serious consequences for the country's agriculture. Today, Nauruans depend on imported food, often of poor quality, contributing to the health problems we mentioned earlier. But the damage goes beyond health. Without the income from phosphate and with a devastated environment, the economy of Nauru collapsed. Unemployment rose, and with it came poverty and social problems. For a country that once boasted of being the richest in the world, the contrast is shocking. Today, the island struggles to recover from the mistakes of the past, seeking alternatives to ensure a future for its residents amidst so much destruction. If environmental devastation wasn't enough, Nauru also faced a huge corruption and mismanagement crisis. When phosphate began to run out, instead of planning for a sustainable future, The country's leaders squandered money on ill-advised investments and luxurious lifestyles. In the 1990s, Nauru's money was practically gone, and what little was left was swallowed by corruption. Public funds were diverted, projects were abandoned halfway, and the island sank into debt. In the face of a financial crisis, Nauru became a tax haven and a money laundering hub, trying to raise funds in any way possible. But instead of improving the situation, these actions worsened the country's image internationally, further isolating it. With the bankruptcy declared in 2004, the country faced a dire reality: hospitals without medicines, schools without resources, and public employees without wages. The situation became so desperate that Nauru had to rely on aid from other countries to survive, becoming a hostage to the mistakes of the past. And while the residents pay the price of these errors, the political instability remains, making it difficult to rebuild the nation. But among all the problems, one of the darkest aspects of Nauru emerged in recent years. In an agreement with Australia, the island became a true open-air prison for refugees. Desperate people fleeing wars and persecutions were sent to Nauru in exchange for financial aid. Far from being a haven, the island turned into a nightmare for many. Isolated, with limited access to basic services and subjected to terrible conditions, refugees face a reality that is even harsher than what they fled from. Reports of violence, abuse, and hopelessness fill the news. Nauru, once a symbol of prosperity, now represents despair. The refugee crisis exposed the island's fragility and lack of structure to deal with such a complex issue. And while the government tries to defend the agreement as necessary, human rights organizations denounce the violations and demand an end to this inhumane policy. But until a solution is found, Nauru remains a forgotten prison in the middle of the Pacific, a stark contrast to the paradise it once was. In summary, Nauru is a place of contrasts. From the golden age of phosphate to the current economic and social crisis, the island tells a story of prosperity and decline, of dreams and nightmares. Visiting Nauru is more than just exploring a remote place. It's understanding the impact of human actions on the environment and society. It's learning how wealth can be fleeting and how the consequences of mismanagement and exploitation can be devastating. And amidst so many challenges, it's admiring the resilience of a people who, despite everything, strive to rebuild their home. Nauru may be one of the least visited places on the planet, but its story is one of the most compelling and instructive.